Hey everyone, Greaseball here. I've been loving the timeless format with the new alchemy and anthologies cards coming in. Basically, all these new cards. Number one, they did not help Mardu and Show and Tell at all, and number two, they basically helped these like tier 3 and tier 4 decks become a lot more viable and competitive. And I don't think they're necessarily as good as like Show and Tell or Energy, but the newer decks do feel like a lot more viable, and like you can actually ladder with them, which is really nice. Where before it is kind of like you would just kind of you just kind of run into like how bad your deck is at some point in time. But everyone's playing like a bunch of new decks, and everyone's kind of having a good time, and the meta feels like pretty open right now. So I'll just be talking about it. Just get some yapping in. All right, so let's start the elephant in the room. Okay, before we talk about all the fun stuff, Mardu Energy has had a very little play rate on the ladder, despite being one of the best decks in the format. If anything, I think it kind of got a bit better positioned, though it didn't get any new cards. Notably, Mardu Energy is like playing for Strip Mine on these lists over spell slots, so there's been like a decrease in Static Prisons, Juggernaut Peddler, and Orgus Bowmasters, and they're 75. This doesn't have any like immediate impact, but it does mean like, okay, combo's a bit less attacked. These like non-creature artifact enchantment strategies are maybe a bit more open because there's less main deck Static Prisons. Affinity gets like less immediately hated because there's less Orcish Bowmasters in their 75s. So you kind of, well, it kind of, they do get the 4 strip mines. It kind of does free up some like equity in the metagame that Marty maybe had a bit more like dominance over. So that's nice. Also notably, I think Marty Energy is favored versus like a lot of the new strip mine decks, if not all of them. Let's just get that out of the way. I think Marty Energy like this runs a lot of removal that's really good, and like works really well with 1 and 2 mana, and I'll kind of mention that further along. But I think Mardu is like one of the best decks in the format right now, just based on positioning. All right, now let's get into the fun stuff. Strip Mine 2, Judgment Day. All right, so I think when Strip Mine first came into the format, I think we were kind of trying to figure out the one like these like highly efficient one drops that paired well with Strip Mine. And I think we had Tamio kind of in that list for a while, but after like kind of a lot more play and just a lot more laddering, it's kind of been very apparent to me, especially with like Ren and 6 now in the format, that Ragavan and Deathrite Shaman are kind of your two best like enablers or threats paired with like a turn 2 strip mine. So with that, let's kind of talk about like let's go into play patterns a bit and stuff like that. So like the strip mine locks with Ren and 6 and Weary Zone Guard have they kind of play like an A plus B combo. But you have more disruption off of the strip mines coming down whenever they come down, and then they're just kind of like latent in your graveyard. Um, so that's like kind of nice. Is you're a bit more disruptive than like a shift and tell, or like a show and tell combo deck. But there is this drawback of you do have less assertiveness in the late game off your Weary Zone Guards and your Ren and 6s. Just because if you get a strip mine down and it's like turn 8 and your opponent has like 4 or 5 lands into play, it's just like not nearly as threatening, and you're not like squeezing them out of the game as quickly. And so there's kind of like this curve that I'll go into that it kind of does matter when your combo comes down, because late game it's just not that you're not really closing out the game quickly enough, I think, with your strip mine blocks. Unless you have something like an Ice Explorer, right? But then you're committing on that, and so there's kind of that issue that comes with that as well. But yeah, I think the clear consensus is Ragavan, Deathrite Shaman are like clearly on their own tier on threatening to in the game on the spot with Strip Mine when paired with because Ragavan you're just getting ahead on mana all the time. Deathrite Shaman you're staying ahead on mana, but you can go like Deathrite Shaman into Strip Mine. You play Ren and 6, pick up Strip Mine on turn 2, and the game's just like really hard to come back from at that point. So yeah, I think these are the two clear threats that meta has kind of like identified as pairing best with strip mine. Now let's look at the play patterns of strip mine locking. This is kind of how I've thought about it. Is that the like more the less mana you have in play, the higher the threat level is of a strip mine coming down and kind of like locking you out of the game, or creating some kind of like big mana disparity. So like turn 1 and 2, it's like very important, and then it gradually decreases, and then it kind of falls off a cliff after beating about like once you have about like 4 mana in play. Now noticeably like something that's been interesting to see is like even with like something like a Ragavan, right? So you go like turn around Ragavan, and you know they play fetch. You can actually just like reset if you keep two Ragavans. It's actually fine a lot of the time now, especially with strip mine, because like okay, so like say you play turn one Ragavan, they hold up a fetch. They have to hit your Ragavan with removal. You know they fetch and sword your Ragavan during combat. You play your strip mine. You know you strip their white source or you know whatever it was that casted their removal. And you play out your second Ragavan, and you're basically you have a turn one Ragavan all like what plays as the turn one Ragavan all over again. Um, except now both players also just have like they're down like two cards from that exchange, right? So like it's actually like the follow up Ragavan to your first Ragavan after strip mine actually ends up playing a lot better than the first Ragavan coming down. So you just have to be very aware of like how things like Ragavan and Deathrite Shaman can like disproportionately scale your mana advantage. And because of this and like the fact that like you can basically reset turn ones like in terms of mana off of strip mine, I I think people do need to be like running more removal because like if you fail a removal check versus some of these strip mine decks, like you're kind of just out of the game at that point. There's not a, it's really hard to come back from. So notably, I have not played a Ren and Strict Strip Mine deck that feels like extremely powerful yet. I think you know a lot of people like haven't experimented with like red green too much up until this point, so people are like still trying a lot of things out. Um, Notably that when Red and Six pulls you into red green, you kind of need a third color to contest combo well. Like you know generally black or blue, but is like has been the go to in timeless. But you might be able to get there with like some like white creatures and stuff like that too. Um, There also might be I really like the red Stompy Shell, and you might be able to get away with a small ball Stompy Shell where you're just like running more fetches and you kind of just have like a Deathrite Shaman, a Ren and Six like splash, and then you're playing like a red green Stompy deck. You do lose out on like a lot of the moxes and like utility lands that come from that, and you switch like more of a fetch mana base, but I think that might be viable. But again, there just hasn't really felt like a really like strong assertive Ren and Six list that like plays well right now. Because like you do kind of need the first few turns to go well for you. Um, you know, if you play again, if you play Ren and Six like a couple of turns late, it's just not nearly as impactful. If you're on the draw, it's not nearly as impactful. And so there's just like a lot of these like when playing these decks, it's like sometimes you'll have games where you just like get your Ren and Six, or you know, you'll get your like Ragavan or your Deathheart Shaman down, you follow it up with a strip mine, or you have two strip mines, right? Like and you just like kind of run them over. But if it doesn't like stay on that like kind of sequence of events that like really favors you, a lot of your cards end up like feeling kind of mopey. Like just like a turn three Deathrite Shaman is not nearly as impactful as like a Guide of Souls on turn three, right? Or like Ren and Six on turn three or four is not nearly as impactful as you know like a Johnny coming down. So like the timing of your cards matters a lot more. And it can kind of like end up feeling a bit clunkier. You're just your card quality is much lower when you're not like executing this combo and like really pressuring strip mine. Also, just notably, I think like Grief X, like the Grief scam decks don't suffer as much from the slow cough problem because like strip mine is very disruptive, and you can kind of like you're able to kind of like create lower resource games more easily because you can also hit their lands, which is like kind of interesting. And then you also just like you can top deck into like locks, you know, like before you'd just be closing out with Grief, and you know like maybe like a Shield Druid or like a Troll or something. Whereas like I think like a Weary Zone Guard kind of more assertively will close out with a strip mine. So the Grief X decks have like felt a bit better, just from the effects that strip mine has had on the meta. All right, next deck. It's probably the two big ones are strip mine and Affinity decks. Affinity's unlocked. Woo. Results may vary. So Affinity does feel like very like linearly powerful, and would probably be like tier two or so if the hate pieces didn't exist. And I feel like a lot of people are packing them right now. It has kind of played like a Dark Ritual deck. Like you're just kind of like all in combo. You kind of just like mulligans like a really good start. And except you know people have to pack different hate pieces for you, like Meltdown, Vexing Bubble, Orchestra Master, Fragment Reality. This can put a strain on like card slots and sideboards in general in the meta, and so that I think that's kind of something important to like understand and realize is that like yeah, it kind of sucks that Affinity is getting hated out or like it is getting hated out right now. But it is like you know, you're taking if you're taking 2 slots out of like you know, like someone else's sideboard, it is kind of opening the meta to other decks. Um, and I could see if people like, you know, what's going to happen is, you know, Affinity meta share goes down. If people start like cutting Affinity hate pieces and there's like less Orcus Bowmaster in the meta in general, I could see Affinity randomly doing well at a tournament where people are on like combo or like strip mine lists. Because it does, I think it does have a really reasonable matchup into them. And so I think there is a window for like Affinity to do well. It's just like you know, Mox Opal was one of the big ads, and people have kind of had their eyes on targeting Affinity for a while lately. I think personally, I've been like, I think like 10-1 against Affinity or something like that, and I like lost to, and it was like a really like weird weapons manufacturing list that I lost to. So like it's just very targeted right now, but I do think it is just one of those decks, kind of like a dredge list where um yeah, it might be well positioned one weekend. I could definitely see that. Notably, there's been kind of a this is the most like creature heavy format I've seen in Timeless in a very very long time. Um, there's a lot of new powerful creatures in the format right now, and I'm kind of including Wary Zone Guard because it's kind of benefited from this like addition of Strip. I mean, because Strip Mine made it playable, right? And and notably, like a lot of these creatures are pulls away from lure sticks. Uh, and so with that, I kind of think the low resource like grief scam strategies get better, because people aren't having companions to just like refuel back up in the mid to late game when the game is kind of stalling out. There's also, if you notice, like none of these pulls are to white, so there's a lot less sword splashers in the format too, which like seems like pretty exploitable. Just because there's such a disparity between swords plowshares and fatal push, and people generally hate running the 2 mana removal because like you kind of have to keep up with other 1 drops and stuff like that, and like Ragavan and stuff. So um, people are really forced to like run fatal push, but then fatal push is really bad in some games. So I think like less swords plowshares in the format is like exploitable in some capacity. I don't know what, but it's definitely there and kind of waiting to be taken advantage of. 4 removal spells feels like not enough in the format right now. You probably want like 6 to 8. Again, with like the Ragavan strip mine lines, Deathrite Shaman strip mine lines. Some of these creatures, if they like start getting it, like if Wary Zone Guard passes a check and just like gets to strip mine you once or twice, that's really bad. Like if Bargoyf gets in, it's really bad. There's just a lot more creatures in this format right now. Um, and I think you really just have to be ready and have an abundance of removal. I don't think you can like, yeah, 4 swords is nice if you're like comboing like short like show and tell, but like you can really feel it if you miss a removal check in this format now, I think. And so yeah, I think people, if they're, you know, on these like mid-range or like kind of like interactive lists, I wouldn't be surprised if they end up going to like six removal spells in the main or something like that, and then have like 2 on the board. Um Notably, I think like, so I think Pyrogoyf is, it has really improved the mono red like stompy list in a very meaningful way. I do think that list is like reasonably competitive. Um I think the hydroponics architect is like pretty like it's pretty interesting in that like just having a 20% chance to hit strip mine is really good. And you're probably already like playing Flare of Denial. And I do think this kind of passes the timeless like playability bar. And so I think I think it's been a really neat card as well. Barroquoif I've been a bit less impressed by. I know a lot of people have kind of sold it as like a sideboard juke for combo, but it like I've kind of been playing combo, and my experience with it has been like, all right, if I like open up you know, a mulligan and I have 7 cards, right? And I have like Dark Ritual Bargoyf, like am I really that excited to keep it? I'm not. I'm really not. And then like it only comes down as like a 1/2 death touch if you ritual it out, because like a lot of your combo lists like don't play fetches. And so you're like, it's like not that threatening, and there's just like not that big of a rush, and like you also don't really have the creatures that you're like drawing off of it very well. So like I'm open to it being in this like sideboard juke plan, but I have not seen it pan out well enough for me to be like really happy with it. Um, but all in all, like these have all like been very like interesting cards, and like they've kind of all encouraged like this increase of removal. Okay, what about these new decks? These were all kind of listed in the gathering.gg to keep an eye on. Affinity, I've kind of been over that. I think it's like a reasonable deck that just like is hated out a ton right now. Naya Energy kind of suffers from like this like the same 106 problem with Strip, where they kind of like need things to go perfectly well and like have your, you know, you have to have your Ragavans on time, you have to have your Deathright Shamans on time, you have to have your Ren and 6 on time. And there's just like a lot of pressure on the deck to do that. Um, that I think makes it very tough for that and the Lurrus Jund energy list as well. Um, Mono Red Stompy, I've actually been like pretty impressed by. You get like a lot of really assertive draws off like Strip Mine and like early Maguses of the Moons. You also get to play Ancient Tomb, which is just a really nice card that none of these other lists like really have access to besides the Golgari mid range. I'm not 100% sure on Golgari mid range. I haven't gotten to play that list a ton yet, but I think that list has benefited from the like Grief being better positioned along with the Strip Mine locks. Um, yeah, all in all, I would say that like the two I think best performers out of this list, from what I've seen, have been the Mono Red Stompy and the Golgari mid range list. Um, Everything else has kind of felt like the Ren and 6 list I've just felt a bit too fragile right now, and then the Affinity list has also felt fragile for the case of like sideboard hate. Um, but again, experimenting with red green is a new thing, so I think you know, people might eventually figure out a better list that feels better and is a bit more resilient in general. So hopefully that happens. But right now, my two favorites have been probably Mono Red Stompy and Golgari Midrange. Uh, People are not playing with these cards. I'm very surprised. Thought Scour and Treasure Cruise combined with Strip Mines, trading on resources seems like very powerful. You know, if you like fetch Thought Scour, that's 4 cards right there, and then if you Strip Mine, that's 5, and you're like really close to you're just really close to getting like a 1 mana Treasure Cruise, and you're like trading resources with your opponent. Really, like Strip allows you just like a free trade that like resets the turn basically. Um, so I think that's a very powerful effect that just like hasn't blue deck hasn't really been figured out yet. That people are like still playing with, but it seems very well like it just seems like a very good card in a format with Treasure Cruise and fetches. Life Depth giving the added redundancy to reanimate strategy seems really good, especially like there's a lot of sideboards that are really light on graveyard hate. Deathright Shaman is like the only like really frequently played graveyard hate, and even then that's like it's like pretty slow and predictable. Um, so I'm just surprised Life Depth hasn't there hasn't been a shell for it that's been figured out. You could even like you don't even have to necessarily go like the slot machine route. Like you could actually just go like a faithless looting type thing, or just something that discards, or like a thoughts. Like there are a lot of different options that you could go with this that I think would make sense. And I'm just surprised there hasn't been a list that's been like picked up quite yet. Looking at journal meta trends. So again, I don't think people are probably not running enough removal in the 75. I cannot say that enough. I think that's been kind of the biggest thing I've seen. Um, Two, there's a lot less swords of plowshares in the format. Black removal is kind of at an all-time high with like this like push towards red green, and then people end up wanting to play like black for discard. Uh, there's a lot less Lurrus in the format with all the Goys running around and Wary Zone Guard. Um, and so like I think that kind of makes like these like grief strategies again better because you don't have to like deal with the companion at the end. People are barely running any graveyard hate. There's like a random surgical here and there. There's like a random like hearse here and there, but this is probably the lowest I've seen graveyard hate since like that. I think when there's like since like I convinced created like run shift until in a weekend tournament. Like it's kind of mind boggling. And I think part of it too is because shift intel is like no longer a deck in this format because of strip mine that there hasn't been like this like resilient anti discard deck that like has inevitability from the graveyard pop up yet. Um, and so like I kind of like there should be a shell that exists somewhere in the card pool. I don't know, but I if you want to build a graveyard deck, now is the time to do it. I can't think of a better time. Notably also like with like more affinity, there's also less like commandeers in people's sideboards. There's just like because affinity is like helping like in like the amount of big creatures coming down are like kind of spacing out and like really putting pressure on people's sideboards. People are running less commandeers for combo. So that's also something to note. With this, I do think there's that opening for like a graveyard or dark ritual based combo. But notably, hand hate is still pretty high because a lot of people are still playing black for like Thoughtseize and Grief, and they're just playing like a lot of John builds and stuff like that. So um, you really want something that's resilient to discard that uses the graveyard. I don't know what a shell like that looks like, but I do think just the time for a graveyard deck is like here if there is a graveyard deck in the format. All right, Greaseball, I want to hit Mythic. I want to hit top 1200. I want to hit top 250. What should I play? I think it's Mardu Energy. I don't think it's close. Mardu Energy kind of has like a lot of these things that I already liked. Is like you get to run Lurrus against creep decks. You get to run like 8 to 10 removal, which is really good against these like must answer threats. Um, I think it's just really well positioned right now. Your curve is like functions a lot better off 1 and 2 drops. So I like you're really good even if they have a strip mine early. Yeah, notably I think Show and Tell got hit by other decks getting better, and then the strip mine disruption curve hits Show and Tell a lot more reasonably. Like just Show and Tell kind of wants 3 mana for like stock up, or like they have to like activate their brainstorm and stuff like that, and they have to have 3 mana to cast Show and Tell, and so like the strip mine disruption is a lot more noticeable when you're playing Show and Tell decks. Now for my bad advice, please don't listen. This is the closest I've come to just like running like Phoenix combo in best of 3 because there are just so few circles at the moment. I've never seen this amount of like this lack of graveyard hate in the format. I think it's really attackable in some capacity, but yeah, I think a lot of people are like having a lot of fun and stuff like that. I think Mardu Energy is like probably just about the best position to beat up on like random decks and shit. And it's most like resistant to discard because they have the Lurrus Companion, and they have a lot of efficient 1 and 2 drops that can kind of get down on par and compete with discard. So yeah, I think Mardu Energy is the call right now. I don't know. I really want to try some kind of like graveyard build and try and like build around this because or like just like a low resource build that like uses 4 treasure cruise with Thought Scour or something like that. But yeah, I think the format's in a really good place right now. I think like I want to give WotC like a lot of credit because I do think I mean the anthology was like so perfect in that it didn't help like the top 2 meta decks. So I do think they kind of do have their ear to the ground of the format. And yeah, I'm just really format's been really great. Probably gonna keep playing a lot. Yeah, awesome. Yeah. Thank y'all for listening.